everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Fight Chat Friday, where every week we discuss some elements of ITF sparring, competition, sport, coaching, and try to shine a light on the very, very best of performance-related ITF Taekwondo. We are Taekwondo Coach Academy, and I'm Adrian Byrne, with me Richie Ford. And today we have quite a good topic, I think, something very interesting that was suggested to us over Instagram. So, Richie, do you want to kind of introduce the topic for today?
Yeah, so this question actually came in as based on, I think it was 2 weeks ago, we did a video on martial art versus sport. So as a result of that, we got a question from Hans, who asks, do you try to keep the traditional or grading curriculum more lean in order to be more sports orientated or not? And if so, how? Where exactly do you make the cuts? So yeah, I think this is an interesting question, because obviously when you look to compete in a sport, naturally you're looking to make the most efficient use of time, which means do you need to cut in certain areas of the curriculum? As we know, ITF Taekwondo has a lot of facets and a lot of aspects which need to be covered. So yeah, I think it's going to be a very interesting question to examine that a little deeper. And I think it would be interesting as well, based on this conversation, to see where other people are at with their point of view. So maybe they can share their ideas in the comments, and we can just have a little bit of a discussion on that.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I think it all comes back to the initial part of what is the overall goal. And then, like, obviously we have to start working our way back from there. But like, I think with Taekwondo, it's interesting because the overall goal isn't necessarily what the student or the athlete or the member's overall goal is. It's what's the overall goal in the club as set by the instructor or as set by the leadership in that club. And I think that overall goal has a huge impact in shaping what the lessons are, what the time is spent on, and even what's included in the gradings and in the syllabi. I think that's a huge factor.
I think it's actually an unintended consequence of having so much involved in Taekwondo. We have like sparring, patterns, fundamental movements. We have so many things that we need to cover, as opposed to using other martial arts, for example, where whether you're doing it for self-defense, for sport, and for fitness, whatever it is, it's generally the same. So like if you look at sports like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, for example, whether you want to train that for fitness, whether you want to train that for sport, or whether you want to train that for self-defense, generally it will all be the same, and you're just covering the same topics and areas. Where in ITF, because we're trying to almost cover so many things, it can become a problem, because of course that all reverts back to time. And how do we best spend that time?
Yeah, so like, as you said, you look into our composition, and the composition would always suggest, and you go back to anything that's written in the manual from General Choi or in the condensed encyclopedia or the 15 volumes, it's around making Taekwondo a big part of your lifestyle and training incessantly and seeking improvement all of the time, and not just from the point of view of improving your techniques and skills for the purposes of self-defense, but improving yourself, your health, your mental fortitude, your moral character, your physical and mental well-being over a very long and prolonged period of time. And that was kind of the concept. And when you look at what's involved in doing that, it's a very wide and varied program that you potentially have access to, but that has its limitations as well, because full mastery or even just proficiency across that wider range of areas means spending a lot of time in all of those areas. And we have a far more normal situation where the person isn't spending 7, 8, 9, 10 hours a week focused on their self-development within their Taekwondo, and in fact is spending 2 or 3 hours a week. And we're still trying to potentially tick all of those 9, 10, 12 boxes, whatever they happen to be. And that leads to that whole jack of all trades, master of none kind of thing. And I think that is at the root of this question.
Especially when we consider that probably originally it was more guided towards adults. And I imagine it was probably that way up until like the 80s, 90s. Would that be fair?
Yeah, I mean, certainly when I started in 89, there was 2 or 3 kids who started with me who would have been 10. I was 9, and I think Keith Hannon was 8. So we'd say at that stage, we'd have been considered very young, like very young.
Yeah.
Almost the whole class was in their 20s and 30s. And when we were sparring or everything, there was no partners for us. Like we had to spar the adults because that was it. We did our self-defense and our conditioning with the adults because that was it. And a lot of clubs would have been like that. So I think it was really the mid-80s when particularly some of the clubs in Dublin and Cork in Ireland would have started to introduce a few more kids into the training. And certainly into the 90s, it became much more common. But the guys who were running the clubs at that time had no idea how to train kids. They'd never learned how to train kids. That's a much newer thing, for sure.
Well, now generally Taekwondo is seen as more of a child-friendly martial art, and it's something that parents will almost like push their kids towards because it's considered a more child-friendly approach as opposed to maybe the more full-on ones which have a bit more contact and things like that. But I also think because of that like when you look at Taekwondo as a whole, you just said it there that your self-defense training and your sparring training when you started out, I think that's actually almost like one of the issues here, because the self-defense training and the martial art don't really, they don't marry in terms of the sparring training and the self-defense. And I think that actually can become a bit of a problem.
Yeah, I mean, there's, it's one of those things of, if you really, really double down and you attempt to use your Taekwondo as it's practiced within the fundamental movements and the pattern as the basis for your self-defense, well, it unifies the thinking an awful lot more. Like, it's much easier to blend your thinking and apply all of that together. But I think in a world where you have MMA and you have the idea of people with various different skills and options available to them going into a ring to do combat, even though it's as a sport and with rules, there's an element of, an appreciation of, well, this might work in this situation, or this might work in this situation. And, even though that's not, would say, physical Mortal Kombat or it's not, it's not an aggravated violent assault on a street. There's that element of everything being compared to that now, where previously there was an element of almost the movies or the storytelling to what the martial art, the self-defense side of things looked like. I mean, was Aikido good? Well, Steven Seagal throws people off trains with it, so yeah, it's great. Was kickboxing good? Well, yeah, Jean-Claude Van Damme, who never did kickboxing, but anyway, he can catch coconuts on his abs thrown from a tree. Yeah, that's obviously good. He can kick down bamboo trees, and there's all this kind of stuff where for me it was best of the best, and I watched the US national karate team against the Korean Taekwondo team, in a massive stadium in Korea, and for me it was like the Koreans were doing push-ups, hopping down steps and running in the snow and cracking their hands off of trees. And the Americans were studying fight videos and, learning to have a slightly better diet and to do some meditation. And, you're looking at this kind of, almost mystification of the martial arts, what works, what doesn't, etc., dramatized by television. And I don't think it's that much different now with MMA in some ways. Like, you're looking at a dramatization of what might work in self-defense. And the ugly truth is obviously different.
I think that actually brings up something very interesting in terms of the whole idea of testing. And that, for me, is what the attraction is to the sport side, because you train for a certain amount of time and then you go and test. Of course, it's not testing it in the real sense of self-defense and putting yourself in harm's way, but you're testing yourself in a sports setting. And for me, that's one of the main attractions of the sport side, where like whatever your argument is about the sport is irrelevant, but when you can train for a sport to compete in that, and you get the results and you get the test based on the competition.
Yeah, exactly.
So like, did what your training work? Did it not work? What are we going to adjust and what are we going to do differently? And I think that when you have that approach, you're really kind of looking at best use of time and how to use your time efficiently. Just think of the whole definition of competition. It's to outdo somebody else. And that's what sport is. So like, if you spend like 1 hour a week at a certain aspect where everybody else who you're competing against is spending multiple hours, you're going to be outdone when it comes to competition. And that's kind of what is the result of having to, like the question said, lean down and almost. So it goes back to what you said originally. It all comes from what your focus is,
Yeah.
and reverse engineering from there.
Yeah, and the effect is multiplicative over time. So, it's all well and good if you do 1 hour a week for 4 weeks, 6 weeks, a year. That's one thing. But when it comes to 4 and 5 and 6 years, because learning is,
Compound interest, isn't it?
Exactly, yeah. So the more time that's invested consistently, the better is kind of what we're looking at there. So, yeah, jumping back into the whole kind of investment of time and so on, like that's a huge deal, isn't it? Because, your average student who comes to you as a child probably gives you 1 hour to 2 hours a week.
Yeah.
And it's not massively different in terms of the organized training that's happening within a club with an adult. Like most of them you might have 3 or 4 hours a week if it's, a particularly dedicated adult. But most clubs, because of how they're set up, they can't provide much more than that. So it kind of gets you into a situation where you really are confronted, whether you like it or not, as an instructor, with how do I spend my time? And then we go back and we start our reverse engineering. What's the end goal? What's the process? And once you engage with the sport, it defines end goals for you. There will be a championship. There will be a tournament. There will be a competition. And so therefore, you're always looking to see how much can we improve by that time? What do we spend our time on? What's going to give you the most return in terms of time invested? Whereas if the goal is, I'm going to improve this person's life through the practice of Taekwondo, I have until they die. There's no time pressure. There's no end result. It's like, well,
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, because there's no end result and there's no time pressure, there's no performance measure, there's no judgment of it. You need to be good enough to pass your gradings if that's the route that you're going down. But like, at what point does someone, jump you on your way home with a plank, or, and see if it still works? And how do you effectively do that when the person is 30, 40, 50 years of age? It gets progressively harder to be effective in that way. So yeah, it really does depend what the end goal is. And obviously for us, we've kind of chosen to have an end goal that's geared around, the fact that the people that we train in the main arrive to the club as children. They come through their teenage years with, and we feel that through this sport, we can offer them an awful lot in terms of their progression, their development. And it also allows them, by focusing on being good at the sport skills, to generally do very well on the grading side of things. They don't have difficulties getting past that barrier. And I think that's a huge deal for us as well, that when we look at people coming to black belt gradings in particular, the ones who are athletes, they've dedicated themselves to athleticism and competitive performance. They're pretty good at fundamental movements, kicking, patterns. They can jump. They're probably powerful enough to break even if they're not conditioned. They're probably powerful enough to do it. And they can learn a routine. They can, they can put together a self-defense routine, or they can apply some aggression because they have dealt with aggression in the sparring sense. They can deal with the fake aggression of a grading. I don't know if they can deal with the real aggression, but yeah.
But even the whole idea of being able to be comfortable in the uncomfortable, like just that alone is a massive thing when you're a competitor and you focus on the sport. Being able to come to a grading with the backing of knowing that you can perform, like just these small things as well make a massive difference. But just going back to something I just want to touch on that you said already, the whole idea of like doing this as a lifetime activity versus doing this as a sport. I think that's where the actual division comes into ITF a little bit, and we can see like there's tons of groups, tons of organizations, lots of divisions there. And I think it actually can come back to that a little bit, of the division of what the end goal of particular people want. And that can actually have a division then within the whole martial art or sport, whatever way you want to determine it to be.
And it's one of those things as well of like, I have people who are training with me for 20 years. So, and I feel good about that. There are people who are still training 20 years after they started training. So like, that's longer than, as they say, most marriages. So they've definitely got a relationship with Taekwondo, but their relationship started with Taekwondo as a sport. They didn't start with the intention, at 6 years of age. with the intention of being healthy 80-year-olds. Like that, like I still don't have the intention of training to be a healthy 80-year-old. That's and that's 30 years later. Like that's not where I'm at. But the the discipline of trying to improve continuously over time towards performance in a sport, has kept me interested, active, and engaged, and reinventing myself through Taekwondo for years and years and years. So, there's a rationale behind that too. It really still comes back to, though, I suppose, what time are you going to spend on what elements? And to jump really right back into Hans' question, what elements do you think we lean the syllabus with? So, like, if we think about the syllabus as a whole, what are the elements that we would actually be taking out or not practicing as much? And I think if you have some examples, I have some examples that will kind of give us a way to look at, where Hans is at. Because, like, in the end, like, we've written syllabus. You're an instructor and examiner. You have a written syllabus and you have a syllabus that you test. Like, what would you tend to weight through the syllabus?
For me, like, as you said earlier, the things that you can bring as almost, you can improve almost by proxy, in terms of by looking to improve the things you want to improve to make you better in sport. That almost improves your overall level for me as a martial artist. So looking at things like, if you want to be efficient in the sport, you need to be a good level of kicking ability, which looks at flexibility, it looks at kicking control, which then affects things in gradings like your fundamental kicking, your patterns when there's kicking involved, of course, and kicking technique. Then you can also look at sparring as a whole. So there's like so much involved there. You have like the physical development. You have, even at a younger level, you're looking at more like physical literacy for younger kids. You're looking at cardio. You're looking at speed training, all this stuff, coordination, footwork, and then you're looking at the bigger skills which you need to train on as well. Yeah. So already we're talking about a lot here. This is only just two things. And then you have pattern, which is very, very important, obviously, if you're looking to grade, and you need to be very proficient in pattern. And then when you look at that, I think that if you take the three of those things, and if you can become quite efficient at them, I think that there's a lot of crossover then into all other aspects, because to develop and be competitive in sparring, for example, as you said, you have to be quite athletic, which leans into things like special technique. It leans into potentially power breaking, even pattern, just being able to be coordinated in your movement. So I think that when you have the ability to kick well, you have the ability to develop the skills to spar at a decent level, and you can perform patterns at a good level. I think that leans in towards the other topics which you need to be proficient in to pass a grading, and ideally to be at a good level.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, for me, I think where it kind of changes is you look at, and I'll pull it up later, but the season plan, you look at what do you have time for in a year. And, because if you just do a little bit of everything all the time, you have no learning effect. There's no compound interest, as you put it before. So if I do 30 minutes in sparring of a Tuesday, and then 6 weeks time I do another 30 minutes, the previous Tuesday was a waste of time, because I didn't compound on the knowledge. I didn't reinforce those pathways. I didn't reinforce that learning or that decision making. It's just not how learning works. So we need to invest some time in the things that we want to make permanent. So what I would look at is, there are things that I'm not so worried in my philosophy of it, whether or not they're permanent. I need them to be short-term present. And so I would look at things like prearranged sparring, which I probably teach 4 to 6 weeks a year for, 10 to 20 minutes per class, 10 more likely. So you might look at 4 hours to 6 hours of prearranged sparring done in a calendar year in my club. And you won't be doing it if you're a national team competitor unless you're in a grading year. So that could reduce to 0 hours. That's one example. Breaking is something that I do with the younger classes a little bit, where instructors can handhold boards. But when you get to the more advanced levels, For me to do it efficiently in a class of 20 to 30 people, I want at least 4 braking machines. And if I can't have 4 braking machines, I'm not going to do it, except for a brief period of time as in the build-up. Now, that said, we do it against shields. We do practice it against shields as just power techniques. We do speed breaks, so we will do like breaks with one handheld board and so on, and we'll do that regularly, or semi-regularly. But you know, compared to what would actually be required to become very good at braking, like we haven't done that in years because we don't have the facility to store that many holders and bring them out. So until I come up with a portable solution, that's kind of a decision that we've made. Whereas we do have the ability, because special technique, you can use a paddle as long as you have something that you can stand on, you know, and get high enough, you can fairly well practice that. So we do that regularly enough. But for me, self-defense and prearranged are the two that are constantly sacrificed in order to make time for other things.
Sparring?
Well, that's the prearranged. Yeah, that's what I mean. So everything from 3-step, 2-step, 1-step, foot sparring, model sparring, prearranged free sparring, never. Never is basically the answer. I'll give it enough time so people can go on and not fail miserably in a grading on that section. And in our own gradings, I won't even test it till red belt most of the time.
Yeah, same.
Yeah. And now that changes. So what's the situation then if you're not an examiner, you're a first or third degree and you have an examiner and they're saying, well, the syllabus says you'll perform 4 elements of 3-step sparring at this particular level, or you know, the break for this grade is whatever. And then I think you have to ask yourself, who is that serving? And what educational principles is that following? So, you know, I mean, that I think is where the concept of the syllabus falls down, because, you know, you go back to general choice examples, you know, from the start of the manuals, and you're looking at, even when he talks about people of different physical ability, you know, a person who's 80 years of age, or he gives an example of, you know, an 85-pound woman with one arm. It's actually in the encyclopedia, you can find that one. But the point he gives is that there are 3,000 techniques or whatever it is. You will find some that work for this person, and you can adapt the patterns to suit. There's no reason she can't train. But if we have a grading syllabus that isn't adapting to the needs of the 85-pound woman with one arm, well, she can't progress because she can't do that right hand knife hand strike break that's required for green tag or something. Do you know? And when it becomes immediately obvious that when it comes to adapting for people with special needs, you can adapt the syllabus. When it comes to adapting to suit the learning needs of a group or an environment, then you can't adapt the syllabus. That doesn't make sense. So I wouldn't look at it
That's a good
as
point.
so much leaning out the syllabus as adjusting the syllabus to suit the learning outcomes that we're aiming for.
Yeah, and it all goes back to what we said at the very beginning. What's the focus that you're looking to achieve?
Yeah, definitely. Like the bring back up this one again, but the sorry, let's see, can I find the one I'm looking for? Yeah, this horrendous looking thing. Like that's what I see when it comes to thinking about what time am I going to have to do different things. And it's like, well, I have my 52 weeks in the year. I have all of the different things I want to train. I have the different events that you need to be ready for, in season for, prepared for, and I have the amount of minutes in the week that I can actually assign to given things, and that all has to balance and operate to like physical principles. So if you're training an athlete, well, there are certain things we can't do back to back or on the same day, or you know, one day following the next. So we have to observe that. We have to allow rest days. We have to allow for because it's optimal progression over time. And if we can't do that, then we're not serving that person as an athlete. And then when it comes to, you know, if, for example, someone wants to grade to second degree, you have a first degree who's been with you for 2 years, they want to grade to second degree. If you haven't got time in your schedule to prepare them appropriately, well, it's not going to work. They're not going to arrive at that grading psychologically ready, prepared, physically ready and prepared. It just can't happen. So I think it's really important for us to look at what is the goal and then to work it backwards from there. And I think when you come to someone like Hans, who's been around the world of, you know, in competition for so long and has had a competitive focus, and he's certainly done a lot of pattern and prearranged, you know, you have to look at, well, if you're making decisions for you and for your club about what fits and, you know, what is the overall aim? What's your philosophy as a coach? I think is one of the first questions that we're going to keep coming back to. What do you want to achieve? And for us, certainly we've made some life choices on that front, and that means that certain elements of Taekwondo have to be sacrificed for us. And okay, no problem.
But I think it's interesting that it differs as the groups progress, because even you mentioning that, like, at a lower level, the foundation is a little bit more broad in terms of you get to experience a bit more, and then the more you progress, then almost like the narrower the curve will get.
Yeah.
So you're specializing as such, because think about it, like even in ITF competition, for example, at the senior level, at the highest level, there are very few people who are able to consistently be successful in numerous codes.
Yeah.
In terms of patterns and sparring, for example.
Yeah, very rare.
You get exceptions, of course, but it is rare, and that just shows you the amount of specialization required. And again, for me, it just comes back to that idea of time. Like, most people who are competing at this level are working, they're studying, they have their family commitments, etc. So it comes back to time and how can you most efficiently use that time. But I think it's interesting to note as well that for the younger groups, it's much more broad at the base. So you're working on things like physical literacy. Even when you go back to the youngest groups, it's just about fun, getting them involved in sport, in physical activity. And then the more you go up towards the higher ranks and the higher levels, it kind of just specializes a little bit more.
Yeah, and I mean, I think even if you were to go the other direction and go away from sport, so we take Taekwondo as almost like very much as a social activity, as a physical expression of, or an expression of physical health, as a disciplined activity for improving physical and mental health, as maybe a way of self-defense, as as a tool for lifelong learning and personal development, and you leave out the sport almost entirely. Well, you're faced with some of the same choices. How much time do you want to dedicate to sparring? So if you're looking at sparring as, well, I'm only going to do sparring, because I needed to pass my gradings. Well, we're in the same situation. And there are clubs in our association who are very much of that ilk. And they would rather use their time for sparring to say, okay, guys, let's do some 2-on-1, or let's do some modified spars where it's very much like a padded version of self-defense or something. So, they use it as a progression towards their self-defense rather than as a progression towards their competition sparring. They'll do it without gear on. They'll do it, with sweeps, with holds, with, different things. And okay, why not? But the concept that we're working towards is that the ultimate goal in sparring is to improve towards a position where you can compete in a ring. Where if your goal doesn't hold competition as a goal in life, then you're going to have to make other decisions, and you're going to have to cut some element of the Taekwondo training that we know. And that's going to have to move away from it. I suppose in the same way, as you get older, you are definitely going to have to compromise and remove some elements of the training as well. Because as you advance in your age and, and you get into your 60s and 70s, there are certain things that would have been considered normal part of training that you probably shouldn't do anymore, Or if you arrive to the martial art with special or additional needs, like, you are going to have to treat it as you've arrived. And I think we just end up with a very, like, it's such a typical thing online, isn't it? You have traditional martial art versus martial art as a sport, and one wants to vilify the other, or the narrative that we run into is more normally sport is seen as like an ugly subset of the martial art, and it's a watered down version of the martial art, and any modified version of doing absolutely everything full time all the time is probably a watered down version of the martial art. I mean, if the stated goal was...
Especially when there's so many things to cover in that as well. Like, do you know off the top of your head if there's any other traditional martial arts which have so many aspects within them as Taekwondo?
Yeah, well, I mean, what you're kind of looking at is where you've got... Within Taekwondo draws its origins from, like, obviously older styles, in particular, like Shotokan karate has a huge impact in the elements of it. But like Shotokan karate, even within competition, they don't have the breaking or the special technique in competition, but they do have the kata, team kata, the bunkai, which is a little bit like our prearranged, but is done in connection with the kata, and they've got their kumite, their sparring. And then when you come out of that, yeah, they'll have their conditioning. They do have the breaking. They do have the prearranged sparring. They do have, a lot of the philosophical components of it as well. I think that's quite normal. Like, that's very much the style of, what was being created at the time. Where if you look at what you might call some of the more modern martial arts, like, and calling them a martial art is probably a disservice to them as well. I don't think they define themselves that way, but something like Krav Maga or
combat sports, maybe,
or combat sports as well, yeah. So
Yeah.
even kickboxing or MMA or whatever, like the rationale behind it is different. They're a product of their time. So if you look at something like Krav Maga, the intent was purely there's no social good being performed by by training Krav Maga. There's no sport application intended. It's purely intended as a means of rapidly teaching, self-defense or survival skills, and done. Thanks. You don't need to practice it for a lifetime. You don't need to, it's a case of, yes, more practice is good, but the basic concept is it has to be deliverable within the amount of time that you're undergoing basic military training, and out you go, kind of thing. And because of that, it's like crash course, do a lot of it, do it fast, and then go and upskill on a regular basis and practice on a regular basis. But for most of us, that's not a lifestyle choice. If you think of what attracts you to, say, BJJ, it's not just that you might be better able to defend yourself in certain scenarios. There's other things motivating you to do that, and I think that's where we're at. I think interesting, even when you're looking at some of these old videos, the technical fundamentals can change quite a little bit. Style, fashion, evolution of thinking can influence those to a small degree, but they're all a product of their time. And if you want to preserve what they did in the 60s, or then you have to look at, well, we change what we do now. Why? Because they did in the 60s. Were the 60s better in every way than what we do now? We just have to be very, very comfortable with what it is we want out of our Taekwondo. And if it's something that makes us happy, that brings us joy, that lets us express ourselves, then that's good. And just embrace that, I think.
But it's very interesting that you mentioned that earlier about the differentiated syllabus, because a lot of things, no matter what way you're going about it, you're going to take a lot of broad concepts from Taekwondo as we said earlier, almost by proxy, by whether you're focusing on the sport, you're going to develop things like the mental side of martial arts as well, and vice versa. If you're focusing just martial art, you're going to pick up some physical components, and there's a lot of crossover for sure, no matter what way you go. So I think that's the idea of the adapted curriculum is a good point. Yeah.
But so, as I said, the short answer for Hans is yes. Do I strip down my syllabus? Yes, my grading syllabus, I certainly do. And even in terms of, for me, an important part is recognizing the difference between an educational curriculum or a grading syllabus and a competition, or a competition format. The grade, you're looking for the lowest acceptable standard. And I mean, it doesn't sound very ambitious, but even if the standard is really high, it's still the lowest acceptable standard that you're looking for. You're looking for a benchmark. You're typically setting a syllabus where the intent is that anyone who puts in the work can pass, whereas competition is exclusive. There can only be one winner in a given division. So
that's what competition means.
That's what competition means. So for what that means in terms of your practice and your training and all the rest of it that links to it is, I would put it like this. If I was preparing for a grading, I will focus on the lowest common denominator. If someone is already going to pass, they don't get the time and effort. You put the time and effort into the weakest people who are going to struggle to pass, and you probably spend more of the time on the areas that they find harder. Whereas if we're preparing for someone for competition, we take them wherever they are and we look at where is the best investment of time and effort that we can make with this individual to give them a chance of, or the biggest margin of improvement in the time before the next event. And
I think what's actually most important there is the fact that the standard is actually high to pass in the first place.
Yeah.
Like, don't confuse this with, okay, we'll just scrape by and we'll just do the bare minimum and we'll be black belts promoted first, second, third dan, whatever. Like, the standard needs to be high first to set that bar, and then you must go chase that.
Yeah, for sure. But I mean, there's just a philosophical difference between you know, a minimum acceptable standard and the achievement of excellence by being, you know, the number one. And what that does for us is it changes the focus on how you do your training. And you know, training to have everybody get above a bar is far more broad and inclusive in a lot of ways, but it's also you decide you're not going to invest your time as much into the people who don't need your help as much. Like, that's just the way that you'll spend your time if you want to get everybody above that bar. Whereas when it comes to competition, it's like, well, everyone has a chance to improve. The competition doesn't care whether you pass or not. It's just, you go, you do your competition, it's a test, you know. You can learn, you can improve. If you go out in the first round, you can still get better. Whereas with a grading, you don't get any better when you fail your grading. You don't get any better when you pass your grading. There's very often no lesson from it other than this is a check mark that I've achieved competence to whatever minimum standard, and on I go. So I do think the philosophical difference between what's involved in preparing for grading or preparing for a tournament has to be considered. But yeah, you can't do everything. It's not possible. Time
especially
won't
at a good level.
Especially what?
Especially at a good level.
Yeah.
It goes back to that phrase, the jack of all trades, master of none.
Yeah, totally agree with that. So, Hans, you were looking forward to our take on it. There's our take on it. It went everywhere. But you get that every now and again when you touch a hot topic, or you trigger. There's a trigger word in there somewhere, and you know, you set one or the other of us off in a rant, and there you go. So, thank you very, very much for the question. It was an enjoyable ramble in kind of really getting into it and into the whys of it, because I don't think the short answer of yes, this is what I changed would have really given any satisfaction. So yeah, hopefully that's more what you were hoping for. And yeah, help us out over the next week if you have any suggestions, any match you'd like us to review, any skills or tactics you'd like to investigate, any problems you'd like to solve, any training tips or suggestions you'd like to dig into. We'd love to hear from you either on Instagram, in the comments of this YouTube video, or through any of our social media. It would be fantastic to hear from you.
Absolutely. Yeah, so as we said at the beginning of this video, make sure and share your opinion in the comments as well, and give us your idea of basically your take on this topic that we've discussed here. So obviously, if you made it this far, it's something that you're interested in. So yeah, feel free to share your opinion, and we'll have a nice, healthy discussion in the comments.
Thanks a million, everyone. See you next Friday.
See you next time.